Let the word go
The
forth.
challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a pioneering program called Challenge
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
that looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of shared values.
With something real.
60 years later, we examine our divisions, our connections, our shared pains and successes in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Critics are increasingly calling the spread of artificial intelligence the great zombification. They contend it builds on addictions to technology, efficiency, and wealth to create a digital trap, one that ensnares our thinking, our capacity for self-reflection, even feeling, surrendering them to influences outside of ourselves. This loss of inner depth has been a concern of major faiths and spiritual traditions for millennia, all of which have called for regular pauses of a day, an hour, or minutes. In this episode of Challenge 2.0, we explore the practice and promise of such pauses, how it can help us evade digital traps, and win the battle for our inner lives and personal growth. As we reflected, maintaining that sense of inner peace and the potential for inner growth is not easy. It hasn't been easy any time, but especially now. And I couldn't ask for three better people to shed some light on this process and how we can grow into that. So we welcome Pastor Dave Brown, and Presbyterian minister of decades. As people say, when I was in broadcasting for decades, we don't need to elaborate on just how many decades, but also founder of Blues Vespers, and I understand we need to append a word to that now.
Award-winning Blues Vespers and recognized by the Washington Blues Society for the Best Non-Festival event. That's been held at the Interfaith Community Sanctuary and at the University of Puget Sound.
And that's a partial introduction to Imam Jamal Rahman, Interfaith Community Sanctuary. And so thank you for joining us. And Rabbi Olivier Ben Chaim of the Bet Aleph Meditative Synagogue, which I've been privileged to attend a couple of times. Thank you each for joining us.
Thank you.
As we look at this topic, and I'm going to begin with you, Rabbi, you had, I think, a 10-week program on Shabbat. And I'm wondering if you could start us off by giving us an overview of this practice and its roots.
Sure, of course, yes. We just finished this 10-week program on, I eventually ended up calling it Falling in Love with Shabbat. And we finished it just last Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Shabbat comes to us from biblical times. It is the fourth of the 10 Commandments that you find in the Torah. It is repeated both in the book of Exodus and in the book of Deuteronomy, those 10 commandments. And every time the fourth one is keep Shabbat, observe Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
However, the Torah doesn't give you a clear definition of what that looks like to keep Shabbat or observe Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
It's only when we find ourselves in rabbinic times, so around the turn of the Common Era, when the rabbis become the leaders of the Jewish tradition, that they work to explain to the rest of us how do you make Shabbat, how do you observe Shabbat, and they look back into the Torah and they see that Shabbat was observed even when in the wilderness, when we were wandering through the desert, when we were asked to build a tabernacle, that the first commandment before building the tabernacle was to keep Shabbat. And so the rabbis deducted that if that was the case, then all the work that needed to be done in order to build the tabernacle in the wilderness were the works that were prohibited on Shabbat. And they came up with 39 prohibitions, 39 precepts that said this is how you keep Shabbat. This is how the work that you're not doing. Why? Because God created Shabbat in order to rest.
Mm-hmm.
God, in the first book, in the book of Genesis, in chapter 1, God ceases to work and calls the day Shabbat, and He hallows it by not doing. Right? 6 days a week there is creation. On the seventh day there is no creation. So the rabbis say, okay, what does it mean to not create? Then they look into the Torah, into the building of the tabernacle, and say, well, there's 39 prohibitions that relates to creating that we're not going to do in order to make Shabbat. And that's how Shabbat becomes a day, copying what God did on the seventh day, of not doing, of not creating, of not working. So we do no work. We take a day off, a day to rest, because God rested, and we make the day sacred because God made the day sacred by not doing, by not creating, by not adding to the world. So we remove ourselves, in fact, from the world. It's a day of of retreat. It's a retreating from the world, but it's also a spiritual retreat. Could be a meditation retreat, whatever your practice might want to be. You turn off all the electronics. You don't participate in the economy. You obviously do nothing about your work. You don't check emails. You definitely don't check your Facebook page, right? You remove yourself from the weekday. You don't just, and it's not just about what are you not doing. The second half of the practice is, if this day is sacred to you, then what do you do during this day that is sacred? And so it's a beautiful reflection that we've had over the span of that course about what is sacred to you. And how do you create sacredness in the span of 24 hours? Mindfulness practice. It's a very powerful mindfulness practice. What do you have to do to make something sacred? What is sacred to you? So it's an invitation also to define for yourself what is sacred to you in your everyday life. And we kind of went to this eat, pray, love kind of thing, because you want to do a festive meal, like eating together as a family. You invite friends. Like, there's something sacred in being in community and being in family, right? Praying, meditating, being part of your prayerful community, being part of your meditation community. That's another way to practice and love. In fact, there is an injunction that we're supposed to make babies on Shabbat. So there is even an invitation by our rabbis to consecrate, to make love sacred. Those are all sacred practices. So that's the other side. So it's not just the do nots, it's like the do's, but as you think about the do's, you start to think about, okay, what is sacred to me, and how can I bring holiness into my life?
We've had conversations on this, either in this forum or outside of this forum before, so I know there are versions of this idea of a pause, a rest, of what is sacred in both of your traditions. Could you give us a sense of what those might be? Jamal, you first.
Of course, thank you so much for sharing the practice of Shabbat. It is a universal practice, of course, but the Shabbat is so beautifully, has its own wonderful form, actually. Right. And the essence is silence, actually. So for a Muslim, would say, the Quran has its roots in the womb of silence. When did the Quran actually manifest? This was, in the 6th, 7th century, when the Prophet Muhammad, he was in deep silence in the cave in Mecca when he encountered Angel Gabriel, and the first words of the Quran were transmitted in silence, actually, to the Prophet Muhammad. So the Quran has its roots in the womb of silence. So meditating on this, Rumi, my favorite poet, he comes up with his wonderful insights about silence. He says, silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of the little self, the I, me, me. Then he goes on to say, silence is the language of God. Silence is the language of God. Everything else is a poor translation. And maybe just one more from Rumi. He says, in silence, the branches of your intelligence grows new leaves. So there's a lot of beauty and power in just being silent. And for a Muslim, a main practice is actually the 5 times a day or 3 times a day, if you're a Sunni or a Shia, praying to God. And what is an Islamic prayer? It is essentially praising God and thanking God. And the Islamic sages say, when you praise God, God doesn't become holy, we become holy. And when we thank God, the Quran says everything that exists in the heavens and the earth is extolling the limitless glory of God. So when I'm thanking God, I'm joining a cosmic chorus, and my entire being is being uplifted. One last thing I would say the Quran says about spiritual practice, you simply have to transform your ego, that's called nafs in the Quran, from a commanding master into a personal assistant. That's a lot of inner work. And also goes on, that's not even enough. You have to cleanse your heart and open your heart. So there's a lot of inner inconvenient work we have to do to become a more complete, evolved human being.
Dave, what does that look like for you?
My friend Olivier and I have talked a little bit about this. Sabbath keeping is also very much part of the Christian tradition and the Christian journey. And I have tried, maybe since about 2006 when I preached on this at my former church, I have tried to keep the Sabbath. I find that when I talk about it within the Christian household, many stay away because they feel it's legalistic and judgmental and a bunch of rules that you have to check. But I have tried to encourage people and in my own life to say, only do the things that bring you delight. Don't have a to-do list. Only do the things that make you glad to be alive, that make you feel close to God, close to the mystery. And so if you are walking outside and you are happy about your flowers and you want to pick one, fine. But if you have a list, say, I guess I have to pick flowers to put on the table, don't do that. Just do the things that nourish your soul. And really for 20 years that I have tried on Sunday, even when I'm working, preaching, to start looking at that not as I'm going to work by preaching this morning, I'm going up to talk at Jamal's place or something, but that I'm doing this to delight my soul. And I will stop preaching when it no longer nourishes my soul. And I think it's hard because we live in a culture where we think everything's transactional. We do things to get things.
Yes.
We're defined by what we accomplish. And I guess I want to kind of end my reflection on this. There's a poem, and I've rarely read poems on this show, but I do a lot with poetry. But Denise Levertov has a poem that I think is an invitation to the Sabbath, and it's called The Avowal, which means a declaration, and it's a small poem. But on the Sabbath, I think you enact this. She wrote, "As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky, and water bears them. As hawks rest upon air, and air sustains them. So would I learn to attain free fall, and float into Creator Spirit's deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all-surrounding grace. Sabbath for me are doing the things that remind you to fall into that mystical embrace of God's love. That is a gift that we don't earn by doing the right things."
And it doesn't come from influencers or other sources. And Olivier, I think of when I looked at the website that you have at Bet Aleph, and it was talking about the program that you had, you quoted an author who said, and I'm going to quote, "We are engaged in a battle for the inner life." Unpack that for us and tell us why now is that so important?
Yeah, thank you. The author is Steve Alman, and he wrote that a decade ago. And I was profoundly inspired by, it was part of a long essay that he published. And I was profoundly inspired and made it the theme for the High Holidays that year. Because I think he has it really powerfully expressed that we are engaged in our generation in a battle for the inner life, and we're losing that. We have a great pharaoh in our midst called the algorithm, and it appears to be bent on keeping us enslaved and divided. It appears to keeping us endlessly distracted and inextricably addicted to itself. And we are losing the ability to find the silence that Brother Jamal was talking about, the joy of Shabbat. We're losing this ability to reclaim our inner life. We must reclaim our inner life, because reclaiming our inner life is reclaiming our freedom. It's reclaiming the ability to think for ourselves instead of surrendering our mind to the algorithm and digesting whatever it is spewing at us and saying, oh, this is now mine. Also, the opinion writers, the influencers you just mentioned, from TikTok to Instagram, all the propaganda videos that are just overwhelming each of us, and that are shaping and molding our minds, and really engineering our thoughts. And I think that's what he was pointing to. We're losing the battle for the inner life because we're completely sucked in the outer dimension of existence, and we lose the inner dimension of being. Yes, we are, I believe, engaged in the battle for reclaiming our inner life, and we're not doing well.
They have actually described this as a digital trap, and there have been a number of writers that I've read that refer to this as the great zombification, that we are no longer the source of our own thoughts, our own feelings, but we are doing and living out whatever we are absorbing, which is, we'll not go into the process of zombies, but that is essentially what that's about. One of the examples that I think we see of this shift that seems to be on a very large scale is manifested a number of different ways. One is by select sport teams, and just in informal discussions with parents and grandparents and that sort of thing, they decry the fact that it used to be that days such as Mother's Day, Father's Day, other holidays would be untouchable for scheduling sports events for their children, practices and competitions. That no longer seems to be the case. And I wonder if each of you would share some thoughts on what does that reflect at a deeper sense? Jamal, perhaps?
Well, sure, yeah. As you were talking, I'm remembering that wonderful story of the fictional mullah. The 13th century was fictional, but his stories have many levels of meaning. So here's a mullah on his donkey rushing to the marketplace. And his friends and family, they want to hail him. Say, hey, mullah, I want to talk to you. He said, no, please don't bother me. I'm very, very busy. So what is he busy about? He says, I'm looking for my donkey. But he's on his donkey.
Yeah.
So the point here is, here I'm in this chase for money, titles, distractions to satiate my appetite. But I'm forgetting my real joy and happiness in life will come from relationships with family and with friends. And this is the conclusion of something we've talked about before here, that by now 85 years old Harvard study, or the Brigham Young University, by now 12 years old, that studied or explored what are the factors that contribute to happiness in life. And then they went on to longevity in life. And what was number one in both of them? Having reliable relationships. That was a number one factor to determine not only your joy and happiness, also your longevity of life. And the number two in the Brigham Young University was how you interact with people you meet casually. The teller in the bank, the mail person, the person at the store, how you deal with them in a relationship-wise impacts your joy and happiness and even the longevity of your life. So that is being obscured by all these distractions. Okay.
My question is, where are our faith communities in that struggle for the inner life? And my perception in 2026 is our faith communities, A, are struggling to survive. B, they are so busy with trying to motivate people into action. I wonder if in our faith communities, whatever tradition, are we taking time to focus on that inner life? As somebody who is not serving a church but doing the writing and the freelance work, when I visit places, worship can be so noisy, so much business, so much announcements, and rarely do you just get an invitation to be centered and to feel that mysterious grace around you. And I feel perhaps we need to look at a little shift in the priorities of our faith communities, where we so much want to be relevant to what's happening politically and socially. We want our music to be entertaining in a service. We want to have great coffee afterwards and tell people about it. Do we take time simply to be quiet in our worship experiences?
This seems, and this is to gather together what we've been talking about already, it's an orientation beyond a given day, Shabbat, Sabbath, or prayer times during a day, to extend, it's an invitation, it seems to me, to extend well beyond every day, every hour. How do you go about doing that? What does that look like?
You know, a little bit from what you have said, I'm leaning one point there, to make a discernment, a distinction between a longing of the ego and a longing of the soul. To make a discernment between, so something we've talked about earlier, about between form and essence.
Right.
So, for example, if I may again quote my favorite poet, Rumi, who says, you know, a sunlight fell upon the wall. The wall received, quote unquote, a borrowed splendor. Brother Jamal, why do you set your heart on a piece of brick? Seek the source that shines forever. Or another one again by Rumi, who says, no matter how much money you accumulate, titles you gain, the thief will come from the unguarded side. Therefore, focus on that which can never be stolen. Love, compassion, generosity, graciousness. But it is in silence, it is in our spiritual practices we realize that this attachment to things, as you both were saying, to things material, will not bring me that happiness. So that's why I love that wonderful quote from the Buddha, who says, you know, when you get attached to material things, you're like a rabbit or a hare. You run from life to life. The pursuer of desire pursued. There's no end to that. Or like a famous Hazrat Ali said, Brother Jamal, someone gives you 2 valleys of gold, still you'll yearn for a 3rd valley of gold. So it is silence or spiritual practices that makes us distinguish between a longing of the ego and a longing of the soul.
It helps us remember to go back to the Denise Levertov poem, that we fall back into grace, that we do not create, that our work does not earn us, that isn't a transaction that we've made, but is there for us in the presence of the sacred all around us, waiting for us to have our eyes opened. And I think the key word, especially maybe in my tradition, but maybe in all of our traditions, to take Shabbat, to take Sabbath seriously, it is a commitment and a discipline that is countercultural. It isn't going to happen magically. In this busy, noisy, demanding world, everybody is going to have to come to their place that says, I'm going to need this weekly centering time where I turn off the woods, oughts and the shoulds, and I am present to the sacred and the things that nourish my soul. It is a discipline, and it's going to take a lot of work to get into that discipline. And I don't want to be naive about that, because that is not how the world is ordered. And it starts there. And I guess for me, and I've done some more extensive things, such as a pilgrimage to a day of silence on Iona. But those disciplines, one day a week, start transforming how you see the other days of the week. A day where you turn away the oughts and the shoulds and are open to the mystery, all of a sudden means on Tuesday afternoon, you're going to sense that as well. And your fear and your anxiety starts to drip away a little bit, because you know that you are held by something larger that we really don't understand, but we know is love.
Olivia, I'd invite you to have the last word on this, since it began with that course that you did.
But like Brother Dave was saying, it's Shabbat is like, it's the gym. It's like, it's the practice day. And when we start to really take 24 hours and not be on Facebook and not check emails and not, then on Tuesday, on Wednesday, it helps lose the power that this that these tools have over us. If we can do without for 24 hours once a week, then we start to find a relation toward them that becomes very different. So it's like the ground for practice that continues to permeate the rest of the week. In our tradition, in Jewish tradition, there is no name for any day of the week except Shabbat.
Really?
There is day 1, Sunday is day 1, Monday is day 2, Tuesday is day 3, Wednesday is day 4, Thursday 5, Friday 6, and then there is Shabbat. There are no names for any day of the week. Why? Because you count up toward Shabbat. Everything becomes oriented. Your entire life becomes oriented toward that day. So you count, you have to count until 6, and then Shabbat is coming. And so your life becomes completely shifted towards that inner life, towards that silence, towards like things shift for you because everything gets oriented toward that day.
Different frame of reference and different
Absolutely.
focus.
And so things that may be very important now because you don't engage with them for 24 hours every week, it's like they lose that importance you thought they had. And that's how slowly you can reclaim the inner life that we were talking about.
And that is such a core, such a gift of our being. And the challenges are not going to become less in terms of being able to focus on that. So I can see where we're going to want to talk about this again, and I hope we can do that. Thank you each for joining us, and thank you so much for offering your wisdom. And thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next week.